So there's a little oddity about the Spider-Man and Zoids comic, and you'll have heard me talk about Spider-Man and Zoids before. I've done a video on it before now, but I finally got the final piece of the puzzle together to show you. And the puzzle is the fact that when you look at this, as you bring it in close, you can see that this is Spider-Man and Zoids Volume 2. So you might well therefore ask, why is it Volume 2 if this is Issue 1, seemingly, and it's a sort of first free sticker and all this sort of good stuff? And the simple reality of it is that this is indeed Volume 2, but it's the first issue of Spider-Man and Zoids. And to further complicate things or confuse things, this is a Zoids collected comic. This is a summer special, but as you can see, it's Collected Comics number 2. And you will also see here that Collected Comics number 2 starts with, well, in fact, it starts with the prologue, which we've seen in advertisements for Zoids in earlier comics. Not necessarily this comic, but here you can see that it reproduces the strip from Spider-Man and Zoids number 1, even though it's Collected Comics number 2. So, what happened to Collected Comics number 1? And where does Collected Comics number 1 get its issues from? And that is a very sensible question to be asking, of course. So, Collected Comics number 1 features the mighty Zoidzilla on the front cover, right there. But, as I've just said, this is not the first issue of the comic that we're looking at here. That is completely different artwork, and this is the proper start of the Zoids standalone storyline. So, what happened? Well, simple answer to that is that Zoids did not start out life as a strip in Spider-Man and Zoids, despite this being its home for 51 issues. It actually began in Secret Wars, which is nothing at all to do with Zoids whatsoever. There's zero crossover. It just so happens that Secret Wars was a Marvel comic that was current at that point in time, and that is where the Zoids strip first appeared. Now, I got this Secret Wars because it mentioned Zoids in the auction. So I thought, right, maybe this is one I've not heard of. But in fact, what this is, and again, I've probably shown you this one before, but in fact, this does not have an out-and-out Zoids strip in it. But what you can see is that this prologue, which was in fact reproduced at the start of this summer special, so you can see again, we have the same artwork there, although it's in a slightly different scale perhaps, but it is the same frames basically. So that advertisement gets reused a lot, and it is the first comic featuring Zoids, certainly, but it was produced not as a comic in its own right, but just as an advert for these models that were coming out at the time. They called the original European release models of Zoids. So some weeks after this, because this was September 85, but some weeks later, in November 85, we then have this. And this is Secret Wars number 19 from 1985. And this is where we start to get the fuller picture of exactly what was going on. So this Secret Wars issue is what actually starts Zoids off. We see it's featuring Secret Wars and Alpha Flight, but you can see that on the initial page there, on the sort of the intro page, we have Zoids are here. So there's a giant Zerk kicking things off there. And we get through the sort of the Secret Wars portion of it, and ultimately what we end up with, along with Alpha Flight there, somewhat ironically, given that it was being touted, I'm trying to find it. And this is the funny thing about Zoids, is that the actual individual strips were very, very short. So Zoids actually comes in the middle of it here. I think there was a poster here originally, which this copy of it is now lacking, I'm afraid. It was taken out very carefully because these, it's still stapled together. But here we have the first appearance of Zoids. So this is what I went hunting for, because it took me quite a while to piece together all of the Secret Wars issues, and I think there's actually one more Secret Wars issue that they appear in as compared to what Wikipedia quotes, because I was familiar with the storyline, so I knew that something was missing. So I was able to track down the full run. So it's actually from issue 19 through to issue 26 of Secret Wars is where the Zoid story begins, and I've now tied this up. So if you look at this, you can see then from there that when you look at this first collected comic of Zoids, once you've got past the prologue, again, same strip. So this is the start of the Zoid storyline, and it isn't in Spider-Man and Zoids, it's in Secret Wars. So if you, like me, are trying to build a full set of these issues, what you actually need to do is find Secret Wars. And that's no mean feat, and you've got to be careful because on eBay in particular, there are US versions of Secret Wars which do not carry the Zoid strip. So Secret Wars in the US sized comics is not the same thing as the UK sized comics, which is common in those days. The UK comics are A4 size, the US comics are more sort of A5 size, they're much smaller. So that hasn't changed down the years, of course, either. We've kind of tended to drift towards their way of doing it. But that's issue 19, with Zoidzilla on the front there. What I love about this, and again, I've probably mentioned this before, but I love the fact that the toys themselves were so good that they could just use pictures of the toys on the front covers of the magazines, on the comics, because they just sort of hold up really well, and then the comics reproduce them really well when they're drawn. So actually, you don't lose much in translation between the toys and the comics. Sometimes the comics have to sort of fill in gaps, but the toys are so incredibly detailed as models that they don't really have to do that, which is quite unusual. I mean, the only irony with it is that I often think is that you could have had therefore more than one Zoidzilla. Because a kid could have bought more than one Zoidzilla, so why do we only ever see one Zoidzilla in the comics? On a different continent of Zoidstar, you could have the same thing playing out, and they could be unaware of each other, I suppose. But anyway, I digress. So issue 20 is featuring obviously Secret Wars on the cover, but you can see Zoids are getting full billing now. This first issue doesn't actually mention featuring Zoids. It's absent there, but obviously, the cover's a dead giveaway. But this is the first one to actually say featuring Zoids. And then we get this one. And then we get a very battered looking Doctor Doom. And he's actually blocking the featuring Zoids bit there. And then we get on to 23. And you can see that Zoids isn't really getting a lot of screen time here in terms of front covers. That's 24, so we're approaching Christmas time. And then we're on to 25. And here, for the first time, in fact, since Zoidzilla appeared, we've actually got Mammoth versus a Spider-Zoid on the front cover. But again, that is very much as the toys look. I've got him now. I used to have him, and they are very, very spot on. You can see all the sort of the join points that appear on the toys. It's very clever. Now, this next one took me the longest time to find. I could not get this for love nor money. The only issue of it I could find was like, it was about $40 from a US store for some bizarre reason. Why a US comic store would have a British comic available to send back across the pond, I have no idea. But eventually, I did find this. And that is issue 26, Secret Wars featuring Zoid. Now again, you've got to be careful because this cover does feature on the American Secret Wars comic. So if you're not careful, you can end up with the wrong one. But again, you want the featuring Zoids bit on it. And this was the last time then that Zoids appeared in Secret Wars. That's it. And he's actually got one of my something I didn't remember from the Zoid strips actually, but it's got a really, really cool move by Zoidzilla, who's locked in combat with Mammoth there, and Redhorn is closing in on him, and he realises he's about to get caught in a crossfire. So what he does was he grabs Mammoth and he pulls Mammoth into the path of the missiles, so that Redhorn actually ends up taking Mammoth out rather than Zoidzilla. So as Mammoth sort of limps away, Zoidzilla breaks off and makes his escape. But again, nice thing about these comics is that you've got these nice technical readouts as well as part and parcel of it. So it's not just that you're getting the illustrated comics, you're also getting quite nice sort of pull-out stuff. If you're really into it, you could pull that out and stick it on your wall potentially. So, and as it says here, soon to be continued in the new Spider-Man comics. So this was the point at which it launched off and did its own thing, and then we go full circle back to the issue that I showed you at the start of the video, which of course is this one. You don't often find them with these free stickers on. I do have an edition that does have the stickers still attached to it, just because I happen to be able to come across it. I can show you that. So that's what it looks like with the sticker in place. I think there were a few more stickers you could collect, but I haven't gone so far as to try and accumulate all those together, because I think that will probably take a while, but it's quite nice to have it. Because I have this one collection of them, which is in fairly decent condition, like this, because the thing is, this may be different in the States, but of course in Britain, the common thing was for the newsagents, who are the sort of newspaper sellers, the corner shops, to write on the comics which house they were for. And of course, that immediately destroys any sort of resale value the comics might have had as minty mint comics, and so, unfortunately. And a few of my examples of the Spider-Man and Zoids comics do have that downside to them, unfortunately. However, it did get them into people's homes, so you can't knock it. It was convenient. I have many fond memories of cycling around the place on a weekend trying to find issues that I needed, which for whatever reason I didn't have on regular delivery. That was always entertaining, but it did mean that you didn't get them written on in the first place, so there is that. But that is what Spider-Man and Zoids #1 looks like when it's in fairly decent condition. You can see there it's copyright 1986 Tomy, and there was a gap. I haven't actually noticed that before, but so there was a gap. We go from December 85 there, the last issue of Secret Wars, and then it's not until March 86 that we actually get the first issue of Volume 2 of Spider-Man and Zoids. And ironically, I don't actually know, it's just occurred to me looking at this, I'm thinking of this from a Zoids perspective, but actually, it could be that this is Volume 2 of Spider-Man. Because I know that Spider-Man was getting a run of strips. In fact, he often did have his own comic, but had a sort of a side strip with it. So I'm wondering now whether or not that Volume 2 really refers to Spider-Man rather than Zoids, although it happens to work in a Zoids context as well. So I don't really know which way around that did work, but that might make sense. It might be that they relaunched Spider-Man, and that's why it gets a Volume 2, but it is also Zoids Volume 2 as it happens. So that's just, it may just be a coincidence that actually thinking about it. But that is why the first collected volume of Zoids comes not from Spider-Man and Zoids, but in fact from Secret Wars. So if you don't have Secret Wars in your collection, strictly speaking, you don't have the full range of Zoids issues, because you have to have started with these before you get to this in order to have the full run of Zoids comics. So just something to think about should you ever wish to try and get hold of these. And the thing is, the collected comics, there are only 4 collected comics. I can actually quickly show you the other 2 collected comics here. So the collected comics number 3 there has Gore the Lord Protector on it, and Krark, Prince of Darkness there is number 4. but they don't go the full run of the series, nowhere near the full run of the series, in fact. So the simple reality of it is that the only way you can get the full run of the series is to get all the individual issues, because you just cannot do it any other way unless somebody out there has a cunning plan to bring out the entire run again in a collected edition, because at the moment we just don't have that, which is a shame, but it just doesn't exist. So until it does, I'm afraid the only way you can do it is by either getting someone else's full run, which I was lucky enough to get at one point, or the other more painful way, which I'm still trying to do for a second run, is to buy individual issues from eBay and gradually build up the 51 issue run and hunt down the 7 or so Secret Wars issues that it also comes in. So on that bombshell, I will leave it there. Do like and subscribe as ever, and I will see you for the next one. Cheers for now.